it's worth it to keep a strong cash flow position. Hey, we're back with the podcast, and we're talking about a very important topic today, something tactical, and that's inventory turns and making sure that you're handling your inventory correctly. What's great about this is it's so important for new sellers. And Andy, this is something you and I still struggle with, and we're constantly looking at in both our newer arbitrage business that we're working on and our private label brands. And as we head into this kind of shakier consumer buying environment over the next, who knows how long, I think this is more important than ever that we're staying kind of conservative in our business practices and setting ourselves up good from a cash flow and a cash standpoint. So let's talk inventory turns, and what do you think are kind of the most important things that you're seeing day to day when you're trying to decide on what's the right amount of inventory that you're holding and when you're starting to get a little bit too risky with this?
Yep. So let me just preface this podcast with this. This is actually in response. There was some comments that were left under our podcast. And we encourage, if you listen to the podcast, super helpful. If you could leave comments, let us know what topics you would like us to talk about. But one of the comments was they wish that we would talk more tactical nuts and bolts type items when it comes to running our Amazon business. So that's what this podcast is dedicated to. So if you're the one that left that comment, listen up, because we're going to get very tactical here, nuts and bolts on inventory turns and how important it is to an Amazon business. Just like Nate shared earlier, whether you're just starting or whether you're a veteran, we consider ourselves veterans for 9 years, but we often have to come back to this with the inventory that we have. And so there's a number of things that are involved with managing your inventory turn. But overall, we think the best practice is the maximum you want to have inventory at Amazon FBA is 60 days. So that is the goal. You want to be able to have your inventory at Amazon for 60 days, and you really want to be able to turn that. And we go off of one of my favorite stores that I like to talk about is Dick's Sporting Goods. They're really the only sporting goods retail store that's left in America. There's a few smaller ones, but Dick's is really the only major one. And I've heard over and over the reason why they're still in business is they have a super tight supply chain and they have a great inventory turn system. So a lot of these other sporting goods stores, they would over order or they would under order. And if you're doing that, you're, number one, if you're carrying millions and millions of dollars of inventory, you're not going to be in business very long. Or if you under order, you're not going to be able to get the revenue that you need to sustain your business. So inventory turns super, super important when you're managing the e-commerce business, really any kind of retail business. But we're going to talk specifically today about the e-commerce side.
So let's start by going through kind of the basic overview concepts. And that one would be that many of us have heard would be the fast nickel versus the slow dime mentality, whether you're looking to turn very quick and just compound your money versus sellers who might be very good at merchandising and buying and holding the inventory strategically for the right time to sell. Andy, you've talked about on the show that you made a big purchase of an RA product. I think it was last year, $25,000 or something. You held that almost a full year to sell because you thought that you were going to be able to sell it at a certain price point, like $100 and something versus what you bought. And that was a very slow dime process you did there, right? So I guess walk us through, let's start with an arbitrage specific mentality. We recently have been doing more arbitrage. We bought into a business and we're running that now day to day with the team. And we're having to really look at all these factors of the business very, very closely in a way that we hadn't for the last couple of years. What's your mentality on arbitrage specifically? Let's start there and then we'll go to some private label stuff. But what do you think most sellers should be trying to do when it comes to a fast nickel versus slow dime thought process?
So there's really, for me, this question kind of goes back to what type of economic environment are we in? And, more than ever, I think sellers should be focusing on that fast nickel. Now, again, if you talk to most folks in business, they'll always tell you to, focus on the fast nickel. There are times, though, and there are economic environments where you may want to do what we call a long-term hold. And that was the hold that you were referencing there earlier, where, if you're in a good position cash flow wise, you can long-term hold products, right? And wait for that slow dime. But that only works if you have inventory, right, that is turning quickly with that fast nickel. And I think in the environment that we're in, I think there's an abundance of inventory that's out there in the retail space. We've talked to a number of people. They drive by their Walmart and they'll see 80 containers full of inventory that are in the Walmart parking lot that have not been checked in yet because Walmart doesn't have any space. And so, the supply chain was backed up for so long. And then Target, Walmart, these other major retailers, they overordered and now they don't have space. And so in that type of environment, and that's one that I think we're in right now, you really want to be about the fast nickel, because your slow dime products, they may take 2 or 3 years for you to move, for that price to move to that level that you were hoping for. And so that's when it comes down to decisions. Like as a business, and we've made this a number of times with our products, there may be times where you say, you know what, I'm just going to have to take a loss here. I can't afford to hold on to this inventory any longer. What I had projected the profit to be is not what it is going to be. And I don't want to hold this product for another year. Therefore, I'm going to drop my price and I'm going to blow through the product. And one of the great things, right, about selling on Amazon, if you find yourself in that situation, generally, and we've always been able to move the product. Sometimes we break even on it. Sometimes we lose a couple dollars per unit. But because of the traffic on Amazon, we're always able to go through it. But as a seller and as a reseller, you definitely have to come to terms with those products, and you got to make sure you're managing your inventory. And you may come into situations like that, right, where you had a product, you thought it was going to be a slow dime, but you want to be a fast nickel. And then just to recap, I do think because of the overabundance of inventory we're in right now, you want to move things quickly.
Well, and let's talk about that. Anybody who imports obviously sees this, but if you're not importing products, you're probably not regularly looking at container prices, right? If you're doing arbitrage, like who cares what container prices are? But it does impact the supply chain and the unit economics of everything that that comes into America. And so we've seen container prices go over the last year or decrease dramatically over the last year, right? In 2020, it shot up. We paid over $20,000 for some containers at one point, which was sickening, but we just needed the product. And now it's back down to maybe not pre-COVID levels, but to more realistic levels. And to the West Coast, you're seeing container prices that are in the $3,000-$4,000 range, which is basically back to normal. And so you have all these retailers and brands, us included, who have inventory on the books now that is basically bloated, expensive inventory. So you have, like you mentioned, like I don't know the inventory turns of Walmart specifically. I'm guessing they're pretty tight, but you still have all these big brands, all these big retailers across the country who have inventory that was purchased a year ago. A lot of these companies have to purchase way in advance, and stuff from China just takes months to get here and everything. And so it's expensive inventory. And a lot of times we're looking at this ourselves, and sometimes you just want to get it off the books. You just want to kind of take the loss and get it out. I think that's what we're seeing with Walmart and some of these brands. And so in some ways, it's really easy to get inventory right now. If you're doing arbitrage, there's a lot of inventory out there. We're probably going to see a lot of deals. The question is, what seemed like a deal, is it truly a deal forever? You kind of see this in the stock market or other things. You have this sunk cost fallacy where something used to be very high priced and then it comes down. So it seems like a good deal. But the question is, will it ever get back to that price it was before? And maybe it does eventually, but in a realistic time frame. And so that's something I think we need to be careful on. I've heard several arbitrage sellers say that they're fearful that their buyers are going to buy too much right now and not be able to sell it when everybody kind of comes in. And you see this when a lot of prices of product kind of come crashing down quickly because a bunch of sellers jump on. So this is where that fast nickel is super important. So let's tactically talk repricers, Andy, because I think this is where for arbitrage sellers specifically, this comes into play. This is what we're looking at. So what would be your advice for right now over the next kind of, while we're in this environment, while we see what the supply chain does, what would you recommend doing repricing? And then you already mentioned 60-day inventory turnover. What does that mean for you then? What are you tactically doing to make sure that happens?
Yeah, so a few things. Number one, I want to really highlight that you are married to your inventory. And so, as a reseller, a lot of times we can get caught up in feeding the beast and just acquiring, right, as much product as possible. When we scan, we see the profit margin there. But that's not the end of the story. That's just the beginning. When you acquire that inventory and send it into Amazon, that's when I think the real work begins. There has to be strategy. Even when you are inputting and, adding to that listing on Amazon, the product, and getting ready to send it in, there has to be strategy with your repricer. You got to take the totality of your business and picture what kind of cash flow position are you in? How long are you willing to hold this inventory? Do you have a system where at 30 days, your repricer might become more aggressive? Or at 60 days, definitely, I would think your repricer is going to become more aggressive where you want to match that buy box. And then do you have a team, someone on your team, or are you, if you're a solopreneur, are you monitoring the amount of sellers that are on a listing, right? And so, when you scan it, it may show that there's 6 sellers. And then by the time you get it into FBA, there may be 50 sellers on there. Do you understand Keepa? Have you looked at the past, year on Keepa of what the sales velocity is of that item? And so you need to take all of that information and data to make a really good decision when you set that repricer, and to give you a good idea, depending on the amount of units you have, how long you're willing to hold that inventory. So, you need to lean heavily on Keepa when you set your repricer, when you're sending that inventory in, because that's going to really give you a good idea. Keepa not only shows you what the historical price has been, it also shows you the amount of sellers that were on that item. So you can see how quickly sellers drop off, which is going to give you a good idea how quickly you're going to be able to move that inventory based on the sales velocity. So, we often talk about this. We think Keepa is the number one tool you have to have. It's like $16 or $17 a month if you sell on Amazon, whether you're a private label seller or whether you're a, retail or online arbitrage seller.
A lot of times I think this can just get emotional because we all like to buy. Typically, most sellers like to buy, right? The buy process, you get the product, you buy it. In your head, you're thinking, hey, I bought this much and it's this much profit, right? You're already kind of calculating the profit like it's realized, but it's not realized until it actually sells. So that's the hard part. Most of us don't like repricing. We don't like looking at the inventory, enjoy going through the actual operational side of moving the inventory in and out of the system. And so we've just seen a lot of people's inventory start to bloat. Like you said, over time, it just builds and builds and builds because, we're not willing to take that loss. So we're just encouraging everybody to really evaluate that. Even if you're selling at a break even and it feels internally like, man, I just wasted my time getting that product. There was no point in me doing it. It's worth it to keep a strong cash flow position. We're doing that. We're probably going to take a loss right now when we write some of our inventory in the arbitrage, and we're going to take a loss on a bunch of product right now. We were just looking at it, and there might be a loss at a certain thing, but it's going to get us a cash balance that's positive. Because something that we're looking at that everybody has to right now is the cash flow situation with our credit cards, right? We've never paid interest on a credit card ourselves. I haven't, at least. I don't think you have, Andy, either, since you started selling on Amazon. Some people do, and that's kind of a decision you have to make, but we try to avoid that as much as possible. And so we're at a place right now where we have daily payouts in our account, but we still have to literally look and say, man, can we, if we don't want to add more cash into this specific business, do we have enough money in the bank to pay off the credit card before we pay it off, right? So obviously everybody needs to look at that, but you might want to just reprice a little bit more aggressively to go out there and buy better inventory that is going to turn fast, profitable, and just get rid of some of that old stuff. So again, we're pretty aggressive right away with the repricer, but we definitely have a setting at 30 days that gets even more aggressive. And then at 60 days, it's basically like, hey, this needs to be out of here. And it's not a liquidation strategy, but it's a very aggressive 60 days to try to keep that average inventory turn at 60 days or less. So that's arbitrage specifically. Let's talk private label brands that are looking at this inventory turning, because it is different in our thought process there. So something we just did recently, Andy, is we're looking at our forecast for Q1, Q2 of next year. And first of all, you have to have some type of forecasting a little bit, right? When it comes to your brand and buying inventory, it doesn't have to be super sophisticated, but you have to plan out, for your orders. What do you think you're going to sell and how much do you need? That's kind of like the basics criteria. But we're forecasting, and we recently just decided to revise down a little bit our our forecast. So walk us through maybe why we did that and why other people might want to just consider, the aggressiveness, I guess, of the forecast and the inventory that we're holding.
Yeah, so we all know that here in the USA, there was a ton of money that was ejected right into the economy during COVID, billions and billions, maybe even trillions of dollars, which really propped up consumer spending. And, that's when Amazon went crazy, right? All e-commerce and retail. You try to order furniture during COVID and it was going to take you a year, right, to get a set of dining chairs because there was so much money out there, right, in consumer pockets. Well, that money now is beginning to dry up. And so as retail businesses, as online e-commerce, we really have to think, well, hey, look, what we can't project sales on what they were the last 2 years. You really have to think, well, the money is drying up a little bit. So therefore, we don't want to be, again, one of those sporting goods stores that is, just full of inventory that ends up going out of business. Because if you have in your warehouse inventory that is not selling, right, that is not revenue that's coming in. You can't support a business like that. With private label, you need to look and say, hey, look, is consumer spending possibly going to go down? Now, the tough part about that with forecasting is that if you go out of stock, like that's lost revenue that you can never get back. And so as much as possible, you have to forecast and think about, what are those sales going to be? And then look at your supply chain. Again, that's a big thing for us is we get a lot of our products from overseas. And so there are times that some of our products, it'll take 4 months or 5 months in order to get here. So it can be a little challenging when you're forecasting, potential inventory. But those are all things that you have to take into consideration, I think, coming into, the end of 2022 and then going into 2023.
So for us personally, we looked at at first we had our forecast and we literally revised down a lot of products by about 20% right now. And that might not mean anything to you because everybody's business is different, but that's the level of consideration that we're looking at here. The 20% number was, again, based on several factors that we decided on, but that was, again, just trying to be a little bit more conservative. We're looking at this like, yeah, we want to grow as much as possible, like everybody else. But we realize that having some part of business is 100% of something is better than 100% of no business. If we run out of cash and we just implode and we go out of business, that doesn't do us any good. So we're kind of at the right now, slow and steady wins the race part of the business. Over the last 2 years, we were in this kind of hyper growth mode. We hired a lot of people. We were very aggressive in our sales, I would say, in some ways, in our bringing in inventory. Now we're trying to go a little bit more slow and steady from our brand. So we're going to try to do less. And then we're also using this time to be a little bit more aggressive in our negotiations. We're trying to get better terms with our suppliers. I think a lot of suppliers are seeing this type of slowdown a little bit too. And so they're going to be a little bit more willing to negotiate. With China specifically, you're seeing where the dollar is stronger now, right? And so there's some currency type thing where you can go in and say, hey, we need to negotiate prices. So we talk about that a lot, and it seems obvious, but if you're really planning on being a little bit more careful, I think it's a time to go to your supplier and try to get either better terms, better pricing. And that's what we're trying to do. And we're trying to say, hey, you got to work with us here, or we're going to order even less, right? This is kind of like our negotiation thing is if you want us to order even this much, we need some better terms, better pricing. So I just encourage everybody. This is, kind of boring, but it's that nuts and bolts where inventory is the lifeblood of the business. You've always said that, Andy, that we are an inventory based business. If you're an Amazon seller, you gotta, even if you don't love inventory management, you have to learn to have some type of fondness for the process there. Otherwise you could get burned. And we've seen a lot of sellers who pop in and out of the space because they just let their inventory build up too much. They ran out of cash. You hear it for any business. Cash flow is king, and you can't let that blood dry up in your business. Anything else to add on inventory turns, cash flow, Andy?
No, I think that's great. Again, hopefully this is more of a nuts and bolts. Those of you that want more tactical approach, you have to keep an eye on inventory. And when you purchase the buy, that's just the beginning. The real work begins in managing that inventory and getting it to sell.
All right. Well, like Andy said, we appreciate the comments. If there's something specifically you want to hear on, or if there's more detail you want us to go into on a certain topic, we'll cover that. We are into arbitrage. We're doing our brands. We're buying brands recently. We have kind of a lot going on. So we're definitely not slowing down on what we're doing. And we're still super bullish on the Amazon opportunity. But like any market, you have to adapt to the times, and it's a changing environment. So we're trying to be careful in some ways, aggressive in others, and we'll continue to come back every week on the podcast and let you know what the latest is. Until next time, we'll catch you on the next episode of the Amazing Freedom Amazon Seller Podcast. See ya.